we are looking at 2.6, completing the square. So before we start, I want to take a look at what we call perfect square trinomials. So if I were to factor x squared plus 8x plus 16, so at the top is 16, the bottom is 8x, or just 8. 16, 8. So what's going to multiply to 16 and add to 8 is 4 and 4. So we would write that as x plus 4 times x plus 4. So that is x plus 4 squared, square on the outside, is another way we can write that. So we call this a perfect square trinomial because we can write it like this when we factor. So I want you guys to try to find the perfect square trinomial for 2. So hopefully you came up with x minus 1 and that quantity is squared. So a kind of shortcut way to think of it is, so once again, this only works because these are special kinds of trinomials, but we know our trinomial is ax squared minus bx plus c. Well, in this case, this is going to factor to x, that should have been a plus, x plus b over 2 squared. Now this is only going to work if your c is b over 2 squared. So, this is going to be an important part of today, so that's why we're taking a look. So completing the square is another way you can solve when you can't always factor. So we start by adding the inverse of c to move it to the other side. Then you add that b over 2 squared to both sides, so you have a perfect square trinomial. Factor and combine the numbers on this other side, and then we bring in our square root and then simplify. So let's look at our first example. So that first step is we want to move c. So I'm going to move -7 by adding 7. So you can do this whenever you have a trinomial and then we want to find, I call it the magic number. It's that b over 2 squared. So in this case, it's 6. I know my b and 6 look very similar. 6 over 2 squared. Well, 6 over 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So our magic number is 9. We're going to add 9 onto both sides. And then that left side, that's that perfect square trinomial now. So that's going to factor to x plus 3 squared. The right side, 7 plus 9 is 16. And then this looks like what we did yesterday. Square root both sides. X plus 3 equals positive -4. Subtract 3. X equals -3 plus or minus 4. And then those are both rational numbers. So we can break that up into x minus 3, or sorry, x equals -3 plus 4, and x equals -3 minus 4. So we get x equals 1 and -7. So, example 2, start exactly the same. You first want to move c over, so plus 18. X squared equals, whoops, sorry, x squared minus 2x equals 18. Right, I want you to try and find your magic number. I'm not sure if it recorded, so one should have been that magic number, and then I want you to find your factors for that perfect square trinomial. right? You should now have x minus 1 squared equals 19, and I want you to try and continue solving from here. All right, you should have got x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 19. All right, on to example 3. I want you to do the first um, 3 steps, so all the way until you get your factors, and then check with me. All right, you should have subtracted 8, and then your magic number would have been 49. And then your factors should have been x plus 7 squared, and then negative 8 plus 49 is 41. So now I want you to solve and then check with me. All right, you should have gotten negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 41. All right, I want you to try example 4, start to finish, and then check with me. All right, so you should have subtracted 1, and then your magic number is 25. And then when you factor that, you get the quantity x plus 5 squared equals 24, and then square root. I got this, oops, I got this from plugging into my calculator. And then you finish solving by subtracting 5, so you end up with negative 5 plus or minus 2 square root of 6. So, next. So sometimes our examples aren't always straightforward. So this only works when a is 1. So completing the square only works if a, the leading coefficient, is 1. And then just a reminder, you always write the real number or rational number first. So it is possible to end up with imaginary numbers. And then remember, rational numbers are those like whole numbers or integers. They don't have a radical. So when we look at this, negative 4x squared plus 16x plus 32 equals 0, our first step would be to divide by a GCF. So if I wanted to do this problem, 4 can go into all of those, but we always want that leading number to be positive, so I'm going to divide by negative, because a negative divided by negative will give us a positive. So, and then I'd have to divide the other side by negative 4 as well. So when we do that, we would end up with x squared minus 4x minus 8 equals 0 divided by anything is still 0. So now I could complete the square with that. So I want you to look at example 5 and determine what are you going to divide by. Hopefully you are saying negative 2, because once again we want that first term to be positive. So we have to divide by negative, and then 2 can go into all of those. So from here we would end up with x squared minus plus 4x, because a negative divided by negative is a positive. Oops, sorry, my signs are all. Minus 3 equals 0. And then you would solve like you normally would. So I want you to finish solving this one. And by solve like you normally would, I mean by completing the square. All right, you should have added 3 to both sides to move c over, and then your magic number is 4, so you add that to both sides, and then you factor that to the quantity x plus 2 squared equals 7, and then solve from there. So I want you to try example 6. Okay, you might have gotten stuck on example 6 because this time your b is an odd number. So if b is an odd number, well, we like to take b over 2 and square that, that means we're going to be working with fractions now. So we would be adding 5 squared is 25, 2 squared is 4. So from here, try not to overthink. It's still going to be that same rule. X plus b over 2, which would be 5 over 2 squared is our factor. And then that I would plug into my calculator. So 4 plus 25 over 4, I would get 41 over 4. And then I would continue solving just like normal. Square root x plus 5 over 2 equals, once again, plug into my calculator, square root of 41 over 4. So this is positive negative square root of 41 over 2. And then move the 5 over 2 over. We get x equals negative 5 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 41 over 2. So example 7, let's see, I want you to start it and then finish it if you can. If you get stuck, check with. All right, so for this one, it's basically like the same we've been doing, except you do end up with the square root of a negative. So you have to make sure that you turn that to I. So your final answer should be 2 plus or minus I square root of 11. So I want you to try example 8 and then check with. Alrighty, and then this one, very similar. Remember, the square root of negative 1 is just I, so you end up with the complex number 3 plus or minus I for your final answer. So what's something you learned, and then rate your understanding of this lesson from 1 to 5. And there's a Google form that I do want you to fill out before the end of class. And it's going to essentially be asking these same things. I do want to take a look at some of the delta problems because the delta kind of builds on it. So the first one is finding the square constant. So you're figuring out what is this number. So that's that b over 2 squared. So b is 4, divide that by 2 is 2 squared, that's 4. So just practicing finding that. And you have to get 10 right in a row, I believe. And then this is figuring out what you would add to complete the square. So if using the method of completing the square, so it's once again, what's that magic number? So for example, this one would be 100 because 20 cut in half is 10, squared is 100. So, and then the next one is just doing that first part, kind of that factor and what's it equal. So let me, so, and this does have where you might have to divide first In this case, we'd have to divide by -5 first because a isn't 1. We get x squared plus 10x. C is already on the other side, so that makes that a little bit easier. It's -50. And then we would have to add 25 to both sides. And when we do that, this is the part that we're going to be answering in here. So our factor would be x plus 5 and then -25. So, and then the last part is actually going through and completing the square. So we're just kind of building to that skill. So if there's any questions, you'll fill that out in the Google form, and have a terrific Tuesday.